The film begins with a woman named Yoon-so who works in show business and is very popular. She is known for being charming and lots of people like her. However, her career hits a big bump when a scandal ruins her reputation. For nearly 2 years, she doesn't get any roles in dramas or ads. Then, Yoon-so's manager tells her about a chance to get back into show business, but she has to work as an assistant at a law firm first. Although she isn't thrilled about it, Yoon-so agrees because she really needs the job. On her first day at the law firm, everyone there is very nice to her. They are all stunned by how beautiful she is and can hardly believe she's real. The boss, Yeon-jun, who is also a big fan of Yoon-so, is especially excited to see her and even gives her flowers. Yoon-so responds with a big thank you to everyone for such a warm welcome. In the office, there's one man named Kwon who isn't excited about Yoon-so starting her job there. Kwon doesn't really like being around women and he's usually very serious. He's a very good lawyer and is the favorite employee of the boss because he helps the company earn a lot of money. Kwon isn't happy when his boss tells him he has to train Yoon-so, who will be working as an intern for 3 months. On her first day, Yoon-so goes to meet Kwon in his office and says hello, but he doesn't say anything back. Yoon-so thinks maybe Kwon doesn't realize that she's a famous actress. Trying to remind him, she points out that she was the model in the commercials for the laptop he's using and the sofa in his office. But Kwon stays quiet, so Yoon-so tries again, hoping he'll recognize her this time. But Kwon just looks confused and goes back to his work. Feeling ignored, Yoon-so tries to get his attention by acting out a scene from a drink commercial. Finally, Kwon, tired of her attempts to impress him, lays down the rules for her job as an assistant and tells her it's time to start working. He asks if she knows how to forward phone calls. Yoon-so says she can do it and thinks it will be easy. While sitting at her desk, Yoon-so got her first phone call, and the caller wanted to speak with Kwon. But instead of transferring the call, Yoon-so just waved at Kwon to get his attention. Kwon was puzzled at first, but when he realized it was a phone call for him, he thought Yoon-so didn't know how to forward calls, so he picked up the phone himself. Later, Kwon asked Yoon-so to make copies of some documents. When he tried to hand them to her, he accidentally dropped them. Yoon-so bent down to pick them up but was cautious about her clothes revealing too much, so she asked Kwon to look away for a moment. Kwon, already not a fan of her behavior, got even more annoyed and decided to copy the documents himself. In the afternoon, another employee invited Yoon-so to have lunch together. However, feeling a bit guilty about how things were going with Kwon, she turned down the offer and chose to eat with him instead, thinking it would make everyone happy. Then, she signaled to Kwon that it was lunchtime and invited him to join her. But Kwon ignored her invitation. Upset about eating alone, Yoon-so couldn't believe Kwon had turned her down just like that. After their lunch break, Yoon-so asked Kwon why he was ignoring her. There, Kwon told her that he didn't like people who just rely on their looks. Yoon-so was really upset by this and thought it was unfair to judge someone so quickly just because of their clothes. Kwon admitted he might have been wrong, but he also pointed out that Yoon-so shouldn't have been late on her first day if she was serious about the job. This made her even more upset because she really wanted to do well but felt Kwon was being difficult. Soon after, Yoon-so went to the bathroom to let out her frustration by screaming. Afterwards, her manager took her home. During the drive, she vented about how much she disliked Kwon and vowed to prove him wrong by becoming the best assistant and then leaving him feeling like he needed her after 3 months. At that time, her manager just listened quietly. The next day, Yoon-so looked completely different. She dressed neatly and acted very professional. When a phone call came in, Kwon went to answer it, but Yoon-so stopped him, revealing that she had already forwarded the call to his desk, which surprised him. During another break, Kwon said he would take his break first. At that time, Yoon-so pretended not to hear him. When Kwon came back and invited her to lunch, Yoon-so smiled and turned him down, saying she was on a diet. She wanted to get back at him for ignoring her lunch invitation the day before. Soon after, Yoon-so started acting more professional. She offered to make coffee for Kwon, who said no thanks, but she went to make it anyway. Shortly after, Kwon followed her to the kitchen, not wanting to do any work. While there, he overheard some employees talking about Yoon-so's past scandal. There, Yoon-so pretended she didn't hear them and just laughed along as if everything was fine. Seeing this, Kwon felt bad for her. Later, in his office, he thanked Yoon-so for the coffee. The next day, Yoon-so's manager was off, southwest she had to drive herself. She was nervous and drove very slowly, which annoyed other drivers. One got so upset that he asked Yoon-so to get out of her car. She was really scared and didn't know what to do. Just then, Kwon showed up and stopped the man, threatening to call the police if he didn't back off. Since the incident in the kitchen, Kwon's attitude towards Yoon-so started to change. He felt sorry for her and began helping her become a better assistant. He asked her to find case studies relevant to his client. At that time, Yoon-soo worked hard and brought him the information she found, even though it wasn't much. Kwon was thankful and complimented her work. It was the first time he praised her, and Yoon-soo felt embarrassed but happy. After work, Kwon invited Yoon-soo to have dinner together, and this time she agreed to go. At the restaurant, she tried to show off again by mentioning that she was the star in the drink advertisements there. However, Kwon didn't react much, which dampened her spirits. To make things worse, the shop owner replaced her poster with another artist's. Although she tried to hide her feelings, Kwon noticed that Yoon-soo was upset and complimented her for being strong. Then, Yoon-soo explained that ever since her scandal, she's gotten used to dealing with tough situations and negative comments from people every day. After they finished eating, Yoon-soo said goodbye and started to head home. But Kwon called out to her and apologized for previously judging her unfairly and only seeing her as someone superficial. He then offered her the position to officially become his secretary. At that moment, Yoon-soo was so happy that she ran towards him with her arms raised in excitement. Unfortunately, she tripped and ended up hugging him, which made the moment awkward. They were very close, and without saying anything, Yoon-soo, feeling embarrassed and nervous, quickly said goodbye and went home. At home, Yoon-soo kept thinking about how Kwon's attitude had changed. The next day, she went to the office feeling really happy. She greeted Kwon and complimented his clothes, but he just ignored the compliment and told her to start working. This made Yoon-soo feel annoyed again, especially because Kwon was acting differently than he had the night before. Soon after, he assigned her a bunch of tasks, including taking lots of notes and preparing important documents for a meeting. After a full day of work, Yoon-soo felt like Kwon was making her do too much, almost like he was playing a prank on her. She also felt bad because she had agreed to have dinner with him and to become his official assistant. One day, Kwon was dealing with a case involving a girl named Jen, who was suspected of committing fraud. Kwon asked her several questions, but Jen didn't answer any of them and acted very arrogantly. Yoon-soo, who was also there, got annoyed and scolded Jen, telling her that if she wanted help, she should behave better. Soon after, Kwon took Yoon-soo to the top of the building and told her off for interfering in his work. There, Yoon-soo explained that she only wanted to help because she didn't like Jen's arrogant behavior. But there, Kwon told her that being emotional wouldn't help and then he walked away. Later that evening, they saw Jen again at a restaurant. Kwon had to step away to take a call from another client. This time, Yoon-soo talked to Jen more gently. She realized Jen was afraid to talk because she was scared, so Yoon-soo tried to reassure her slowly. Eventually, Jen opened up and explained that she had been falsely accused by her own friend, which she never expected, and she was so upset that she started crying. Seeing her like that, Yoon-soo comforted her like a little sister. The next day, Kwon proved to the judge that Jen was innocent, thanks to the information Yoon-soo had helped gather. At that time, Kwon apologized to Yoon-soo for his earlier behavior and thanked her, admitting she did a great job. As Kwon was about to leave, Yoon-soo stopped him and asked him to repeat his compliment. Just then, a strong wind blew her shawl off. Seeing that, Kwon picked it up, wrapped it around her, and while smiling, he praised her work again. In that moment Yoon-soo was so surprised and touched by the moment that she was left speechless. When it was time to go home from work, Kwon said goodbye to Yoon-soo and left first. A little while later, she called him and asked for something in return for helping him win the case. At first, Kwon didn't understand what she meant, but then Yoon-soo explained that she didn't just want praise for her help, but also wanted him to teach her about law on the weekends. Kwon agreed to this. After hanging up, Yoon-soo giggled and covered her face, but soon she felt a bit confused about her feelings. The next day, Yoon-soo arranged to meet Kwon at a campus. She noticed he looked different without his suit and started imagining that he would teach her in a romantic way, thinking guys like him were so predictable. But things didn't go as she expected. Kwon was very serious and taught her like a real professor. At that moment, Yoon-soo was quiet and a bit overwhelmed, scratching her head. She suggested they sit while studying, but Kwon preferred to stand as he felt it was better. They ended up studying together until late in the evening. After they finished studying, Kwon went to buy some food. While he was away, Yoon-soo saw a woman approaching him. Later, when they were in the car, she asked him what the woman had wanted. Kwon said she asked for his phone number. Curious, Yoon-soo asked if he gave it to her, and Kwon replied that he wasn't interested in dating. Yoon-soo then joked that Kwon really keeps his distance from women. At the same time, Yoon-soo kept thinking about the nice things Kwon had done for her, which made her blush and pat her own cheek, feeling embarrassed. One day, while Kwon and Yoon-soo were at the office, a woman named Yoon, who was a good friend of Kwon from college, called him. She invited him for a quick drink to catch up since they hadn't seen each other in a while. At that time, Kwon asked Yoon-so to join them, and they all went to Yeoreum's office for drinks. During their time there, Yeoreum talked about her past with Kwon. When their drinks arrived, Yeoreum mentioned that she remembered Kwon always liked instant coffee. In that moment, Yoon-so got curious as Yeoreum shared more stories about Kwon. Throughout their conversation, Yoon-so watched Kwon closely, wondering why he seemed so happy around Yeoreum. After they came back from their outing, Yoon-so was clearly in a bad mood. Unable to hide her feelings, she asked Kwon why he was so happy and always smiling today. What she really wanted to know was why he seemed so happy specifically around Yeoreum. At that time, Kwon didn't catch on to what she was really asking, and this misunderstanding made Yoon-so walk away, leaving Kwon puzzled. The next morning, Yoon-so received a text from Kwon reminding her to dress warmly. This message made her feel special, and she decided to follow his advice by wearing thick clothes. She kept looking at herself in the mirror, convinced she looked very attractive and sure that Kwon must like her. Meanwhile, Kwon got to work and was surprised to see everything decorated in pink. He asked Yoon-so what was going on. There, she explained that she thought bright colors could lift people's spirits. But this just made Kwon feel overwhelmed. He told her he preferred black and asked her to change the room back to how it was before. As Yoon-so was about to leave the office, Kwon called her back because she forgot something. It turned out she left behind some notepaper. There, Yoon-so explained that Kwon should use these notes to jot down tasks for her when she's not in the office. The notes were pink and shaped like hearts. Yoon-so wrote down what needed to be done and stuck them on her desk. She was really happy reading them, but instead of getting straight to work, she wrote replies on the notepaper. After writing her notes, Yoon-so went into Kwon's office and handed him her messages. After she left the room, Kwon was left silent and confused by her actions. As the time goes by, Yoon-so started leaving the office often, making Kwon write notes for her regularly. Eventually, they got used to communicating this way through notes, and it turned out that Kwon also began to enjoy it, even smiling to himself. During a break, Kwon asked Yoon-so to have lunch with him. As they were walking, Yoon-so saw Yeoreum in the distance. She remembered how Kwon had been smiling and chatting with Yeoreum before, which made her worried that Yeoreum might ask him to join her for lunch. Panicking, Yoon-so quickly asked Kwon to leave with her, pulling his hand and telling him not to look back. Unfortunately, just then, they heard Yeoreum calling out to Kwon. At that time, Yoon-so got really upset when she saw Yeoreum invite Kwon to lunch to discuss something important. There, he apologized to Yoon-so because they couldn't have lunch together, which made her even more annoyed with both Yeoreum and Kwon. After the break, when Kwon got back to his office, Yoon-so was visibly angry. She even took back the heart-shaped paper notes she had given him, telling Kwon he didn't deserve to have them. At that moment, Kwon was taken aback by Yoon-so's sudden change in attitude, thinking it was because they didn't have lunch together. Then, he tried to make up for it by suggesting they go eat now, but Yoon-so was too upset to eat and just left the room. In the evening, all the office workers, including Yoon-so, went out to eat. They were surprised to see Kwon there already since he usually never joins. From across the room, he waved at Yoon-so, but she looked away. As everyone was getting ready to eat, they wondered why Kwon was suddenly joining an office event, something he never did before. At that time, he kept looking at Yoon-so and explained that he came because he wanted to see her and understand why she was acting differently towards him. This confession surprised everyone. It turned out it was all just a big misunderstanding. After the event, Kwon met with Yoon-so, and she finally explained that she was upset because he chose to have lunch with Yeoreum instead of her. Back at home, Kwon kept thinking about what happened and started to believe that Yoon-so might have feelings for him. The next day, Yoon-so felt nervous, embarrassed, and unsure about seeing Kwon. When she ran into him, she was so flustered that her heart raced, and she could barely manage to say good morning while looking down. Things felt even more awkward when Kwon called her over. At that moment Yoon-so thought he was going to talk about the incident from the day before, but he actually just needed help with some work. Later, as she was about to go into her room, Yoon-so couldn't hold back her feelings anymore and called out to Kwon. She clarified what happened the previous day, insisting that she wasn't jealous of him eating with Yeoreum and asked him to forget about the whole thing. Upon hearing that, Kwon agreed to let it go. The next day, Kwon was called by his boss to handle a serious legal case. His client was accused of killing her own husband and was being held in a jail outside the city. At that time, Kwon decided to bring Yoon-so along, thinking that working on such a serious case would be good experience for her. Hearing that, Yoon-so was excited because she felt Kwon was really paying attention to her. When she was alone, she even daydreamed that going on this trip with Kwon was like going on a date, since they would be spending a lot of time together. She quickly snapped out of her daydream, reminding herself to stay focused on the job. At home, Yoon-so couldn't decide what to wear. She tried on different outfits and even thought about wearing a mask, telling herself that having healthy skin would help her concentrate better on work. The next morning, Yoon-soo took some time to cook. She was looking forward to sharing the food with Kwon. On their way to meet the client, they learned that the meeting was delayed by several hours. Yoon-soo saw this as a perfect chance to eat the food she brought, suggesting they eat now to save time later. Hearing that, Kwon agreed to her plan. When Kwon tasted the food, he was surprised by how good it was. He complimented Yoon-soo, saying that not only was she beautiful, but she was also a great cook. Shortly after, Kwon asked how she learned to cook since she had been busy acting. Yoon-soo was thrilled by the praise and explained that she had learned to cook during her filming breaks by watching famous chefs. After they finished eating and were walking back to the car, Yoon-soo was very cold and kept blowing on her hands. There, Kwon mentioned there was a pocket that could keep her warm. However, Yoon-soo misunderstood and thought Kwon was talking about his shirt pocket, so she put her hand in it. Actually, Kwon meant her own coat pocket. Embarrassed by the mix-up, Yoon-soo felt silly, while Kwon couldn't help but smile to himself. When they reached their destination, only Kwon was allowed to see his client. He asked Yoon-soo to wait in the car. In the meeting, Kwon tried to find out why the woman had killed her husband, but she was hesitant to talk. Eventually, she explained that she never meant to kill him, she was only trying to defend herself from his constant abuse. At that time, Kwon felt that this case was going to be very challenging. When he got back to the car, Yoon-soo could see he was stressed and tried to cheer him up. She promised to read all the documents on the way home to help him with the case. But despite her good intentions, Yoon-soo ended up falling asleep soon after they started the drive back, and she slept all the way until they reached her house. The next day, Kwon started defending his client in court. He explained to the judge that his client hadn't committed murder but she had acted in self-defense. It turned out that Yorum, who is a prosecutor and does the opposite job of a lawyer, was there too. There, Yorum argued that it was a murder and presented evidence to support her claim. Upon hearing that, the judge decided to postpone the case for a few days. Back at the office, some co-workers were curious about Kwon's case. They had heard about the trial and believed that his client really did commit murder, and they were skeptical about his chances of winning. While they were talking about this, Kwon walked in and went straight to his office. Soon after, Yoon-soo followed him in and tried to boost his spirits by telling him that she thought he was a great lawyer, even if others doubted him, and she was sure he could win the case. At that time, Kwon ended up working late into the evening. As he was getting ready to leave, he noticed that Yoon-soo was still there too. He asked her why she hadn't gone home yet, and Yoon-soo said she wanted to stay and help him. Touched by her support, he invited her to have dinner with him. That evening, Kwon shared with Yoon-soo the real reason he became a lawyer. He told her that he didn't choose his career for the money, but because he wanted to protect innocent people who get wrongly accused in criminal cases. He wants to fight for justice. During their conversation, there was a mix-up that left Yoon-soo feeling really embarrassed. She thought Kwon was talking about her feelings for him, but he was actually just talking about the type of food he liked. Feeling awkward, she quickly changed the subject and suggested they head to a place to eat. The next day, Kwon and Yoon-soo ended up working late again. There, he told Yoon-soo she should head home because he still had a lot of work left. Right after that, she received a phone call from a man who said he would pick her up. Kwon initially acted normal, but became worried when he heard Yoon-soo talking to the men as if they had a close relationship. After she hung up, Yoon-soo said goodbye to Kwon. In the elevator, to her surprise, Kwon showed up, even though he had said he had more work to do. He joked that the law doesn't allow for too much overtime. Suddenly, the elevator they were in broke down. Yoon-soo got really scared and started screaming. Then, the lights went out, making things even scarier. She called out to Kwon in the dark, asking where he was. Kwon replied he was right there with her. When the lights came back on, they found themselves standing face to face. At that time Yoon-soo was silent, her heart racing from the shock and the close encounter. When the elevator doors finally opened, the security guard saw Yoon-soo and Kwon standing very close together. Soon after, they quickly stepped out of the elevator. Turns out, the man who had called Yoon-soo earlier was actually her manager. Her manager then scolded Kwon for taking too much of Yoon-soo's time. At that time, Kwon didn't respond and just stayed quiet. Meanwhile, Yoon-soo kept thinking about their time stuck in the elevator and wished it had lasted longer. The next day, she asked Kwon if he wanted her to make coffee. Kwon seemed uninterested and said no, joking that her boyfriend might get upset. Upon hearing that, Yoon-soo was surprised by his comment and quickly explained that she didn't have a boyfriend and that the man from yesterday was her cousin. Hearing this, Kwon's mood lightened. Then, Yoon-soo asked him not to get the wrong idea about her. Kwon smiled and changed his mind, saying he'd like some coffee after all. That day, Yoon-soo and Kwon were hard at work on their client's case. They decided to visit the crime scene to look for more evidence. There, Kwon warned Yoon-soo to be careful as the area was cluttered and dirty. While they were there, unexpectedly, a man sneaked up and hit Kwon from behind, knocking him down, which really scared Yoon-soo. But he quickly said he was okay, got up, and ran after the attacker. Outside, he caught the man and confronted him, suspecting he might be connected to their client's murder case. Meanwhile, Yoon-soo followed Kwon and called the police to secure the crime scene. Seeing Kwon bleeding from his neck, she was very worried and urged him to go to the hospital right away. But Kwon tried to reassure her that he was fine and agreed to go. Afterward, he took Yoon-soo home and apologized for the scary situation. At that moment, Yoon-soo asked Kwon to promise that he would rest for the rest of the day instead of working. The next day, all their hard work paid off. They won the case, and their client was cleared of the murder charges. It turned out that the man who had attacked Kwon was actually the mastermind behind the entire incident. One cold evening, Kwon and Yoon-soo were walking together along the road. The chilly air reminded her of a funny mix-up from before, when she mistakenly put her hand in Kwon's pocket while acting in a scene. Then, she joked that she's acted in dramas so much that she sometimes gets her lines and real life mixed up. She wondered why Kwon didn't stop her at that time. As they talked, Yoon-soo kept rubbing her hands together because of the cold. Unexpectedly, Kwon took her hand and placed it in his pocket, telling her that just like she cares for him, he wants to look out for her too. Surprised, Yoon-soo asked if this meant she was more special to him now, and Kwon confirmed it. When Yoon-soo got home later, she received a message from Kwon thanking her for her help in winning the case. He also reminded her to rest because they had more work the next day. Soon after, Yoon-soo found herself daydreaming about going on romantic dates with Kwon. The next day at work, Yoon-soo was deeply moved to find flowers from Kwon on her desk, complete with a love letter. Her heart raced as she began reading the sweet message, feeling touched by his words. However, confusion set in when she reached the end of the letter and saw the word scapegoat. At the same time, Kwon walked in and explained to Yoon-soo that he doesn't really like flowers, so he put them on her desk. Yoon-soo then learned that the flowers were actually a thank you gift from a client to him. This news left Yoon-soo feeling disappointed because she had hoped the flowers were a romantic gesture from Kwon. Later that evening, as they were getting ready to leave work, Kwon made a gesture at Yoon-soo through the glass that looked like a heart with his fingers. At that time, Yoon-soo felt shy and responded by making a heart shape with her hands too. But then she got confused when Kwon started rubbing his fingers on the glass. It turned out she had misunderstood again cause he was actually pointing out how dirty the glass was. Feeling let down, Yoon-soo quickly said goodbye and went home. At home, she dressed up nicely, hoping Kwon would call her for a date, but she ended up feeling disappointed once more. Meanwhile, Kwon was busy with work, dealing with many cases. Later, he received a phone call from Yoon-soo herself. At that time, she had drunk too much and was quite drunk. In her frustration, she scolded Kwon for not being more perceptive and ended up confessing her feelings for him. There, Kwon was taken aback and didn't know what to say, so he just stayed silent as he listened to Yoon-soo's words. The next morning, Yoon-soo woke up to a message from Kwon asking to meet. She then remembered everything she had said the night before while drunk and was shocked and embarrassed by her actions. Meanwhile, Kwon, who now knew how Yoon-soo felt about him, started looking up things she liked online. He watched several of her interviews and found out that she liked chicken feet and appreciated love letters. Motivated by this, Kwon tried to write down his feelings on paper, but he struggled with what to say and was frustrated with his attempts at writing a love letter. Feeling too embarrassed to go to work, Yoon-soo decided to take the day off and went out to buy chicken feet, dressing in a way that she hoped would keep her from being recognized. By chance, Kwon ended up at the same place. When he noticed the woman next to him seemed familiar, he realized it was Yoon-soo. Surprised to see him there, Yoon-soo panicked and ran away. Kwon chased after her, and because she kept running, he eventually had to grab her clothes to stop her. Soon after, Kwon asked Yoon-soo to sit and talk with him, but the mood was unusually awkward, even though they usually got along well. They even sat far apart from each other. Then, Kwon eventually asked why Yoon-soo was avoiding him. She admitted she was embarrassed because of her behavior the previous night when she had gotten drunk and confessed her feelings. Soon after, Kwon shared that he also had feelings for her, but he had never been in love before, so he didn't know how to express them. He handed her the love letter he had written. As Yoon-soo was about to read the letter, Kwon suddenly got nervous and asked if she was really going to read it right then. When she said yes, Kwon, feeling embarrassed, told her he would wait in the car for her response. The letter turned out to be an invitation for a date. Soon after, Yoon-soo ran out to find Kwon, hugged him, and accepted his invitation. There, Kwon couldn't hide his happiness at her acceptance. The next day, Kwon was surprised to see Yoon-so picking him up. He asked what she was doing there. Yoon-so replied that she wanted to spend more time alone with him since they couldn't do that at the office. Hearing this, Kwon smiled. In the car, Yoon-so mentioned she had recently bought what she called a lucky mirror. She joked that the mirror must be really lucky because she ended up dating Kwon. This made Kwon smile, and he shyly asked if he could hold her hand. Yoon-so felt a bit nervous but stretched out her hand for Kwon to hold. One day, the law firm organized its annual camping trip, which was an event all the employees looked forward to. Yoon-so was also invited to join the fun, and she was the happiest and most enthusiastic among everyone. On the way to the camping site, they stopped at a rest station to grab some food and use the restroom. At that time, Yoon-so decided to stay in the car, explaining that it would be easier for her since she might be recognized by fans. Hearing this, several of her co-workers initially argued about who would stay back to keep her company, but Yoon-so insisted they all go and enjoy themselves. At one point during the trip, Yoon-so noticed a food stall and commented that the food looked really tasty. Kwon heard her and decided to buy some of what she pointed out. He went to the stall selling grilled fish cakes and ordered some, excited to bring them back to Yoon-so. However, he got confused when he saw another co-worker heading back from the same stall. It turned out that other employees had also heard Yoon-so and decided to buy some too. The boss went overboard and bought a bunch, even grabbing a bottle of sauce. At that time, Kwon wanted to give his fish cakes to Yoon-so, but felt awkward trying to hand them over as others were also offering theirs. Yoon-so just smiled at the whole situation, finding it cute how everyone was trying to please her. After a while, they arrived at their hiking destination and started the climb to enjoy the view. During the hike, Yoon-so appeared tired and a bit cold, which made all the men around her concerned. They asked if she was okay. When Kwon tried to offer her a hand warmer, he found that he wasn't quick enough, as others were also trying to help. He then thought to give her his jacket, but before he could, his boss had already handed his jacket to her first. This left Kwon feeling quite frustrated. In the evening, Kwon was excited to spend some one-on-one time with Yoon-so. There, he started teaching her how to light a campfire, but as soon as he handed her the lighter, another co-worker jumped in, claiming to know the right way to do it. This irritated Kwon and put him in a bad mood. The male employees at the law firm, who often flirted, began gossiping about which one of them Yoon-so would choose if she had to. One employee mentioned he knew Yoon-so's type and it was someone who could touch her heart. This sparked a debate among them about who could impress her the most with their kindness. Meanwhile, Kwon didn't feel like joining in with the group. The situation worsened when someone suggested that Kwon had no chance with Yoon-so because he wasn't her type. What they didn't realize was that they were already dating. At that moment, Yoon-so's manager, concerned about her public image and career, told Kwon that if he truly loved Yoon-so, he should be careful about how he acted. On the ride home, Kwon was deep in thought, reflecting on his manager's words about how to best support Yoon-so. The next day, Yoon-so was feeling really upset and asked what had happened, wondering if she was okay. She shared that Kwon had broken up with her the night before, marking her first experience with heartbreak. She felt shaky and tense, not knowing what to do next. Then, Yoon-so became even sadder when she went to the office to collect her belongings and saw that Kwon seemed to be fine, carrying on with his life as if nothing had happened. Soon after, she went to say goodbye to Kwon in his office, but he just stayed silent and didn't even look at her. With red, teary eyes, Yoon-so asked Kwon why he had become so distant, like when they first met. But then, Kwon approached her and simply said that she had done her job well and wished her well for the future. Shortly, he walked away, leaving her alone. Overcome with sadness, Yoon-so cried on the stairs, unable to believe how cold Kwon had become. After spending several days feeling down, Yoon-so decided it was time to move on. She returned to her modeling career and started to put all her effort into her work again. That same day, she prepared for a role in a drama, getting ready to perform a scene decided by her acting partner. While filming, Yoon-so suddenly started crying during a scene, causing the director to think her acting had gotten much better. In reality, she was actually crying because of her emotions about Kwon. Yoon-so left the set to calm down. Her manager noticed something was wrong and came to check on her, encouraging Yoon-so to move on from Kwon and get back to her normal life. Meanwhile, Kwon, who seemed okay on the outside, was actually hiding his own sadness. Since breaking up with Yoon-so, he often found himself lost in thought at the bus stop, feeling empty inside. Things got worse for him at work when he made an unethical mistake that made the news and brought trouble to his law firm. The other employees at the firm started treating him coldly, and no new clients wanted to come to the firm because of his actions. That night, sitting at the bus stop, Kwon's gaze was empty as he struggled with his lowest point. Then, he saw Yoon-so on a billboard across from him, back to being a beauty model. Her smiling image on the billboard seemed like she was encouraging him. Overwhelmed by everything he was facing, Kwon cried for the first time, feeling very stressed and alone with no one to turn to for support. While resting in the car, Yoon-so couldn't stop thinking about Kwon. Seeing her like this, her manager felt guilty and decided to tell her the truth that Kwon didn't actually want to break up with her. He made that decision because he didn't want Yoon-so to lose her dreams over their relationship. Once Yoon-so learned the real reason behind their breakup, she started visiting Kwon often. At first, Kwon acted distant and told Yoon-so to stay out of his life, but she was determined not to give up. At that time, Yoon-so believed that Kwon would eventually come around. She told him that she was more afraid of losing him than losing her job. She asked Kwon that if he truly loved her, he shouldn't let her go. Eventually, Kwon couldn't hide his feelings any longer. He called Yoon-so and confessed that he really loved her. After admitting his feelings, Kwon approached Yoon-so and kissed her. In the days that followed, Yoon-so really focused on finishing her drama. Kwon was often there to help her improve her acting, especially when she had to act as a lawyer. They sometimes found themselves smiling at each other while working. However, their manager, who noticed how close they were getting, always tried to keep them apart. Eventually, Yoon-so successfully completed her drama. At the celebration party for the drama, Yoon-so decided it was the right time to introduce Kwon as her boyfriend to everyone. This time, Yoon-so wasn't worried about losing her career as an actress or model. To her, Kwon was the best thing in her life, more important than anything else. Everyone at the party turned out to be supportive, and their love story finally got the happy beginning it deserved. And that's where the film ends. The moral lesson from this film is always check who's buying the chicken feet, because you might just end up in a love triangle with your boss, your ex, and a bottle of sauce.